Close your eyes and imagine Harlem at night, 1970. Neon lights flicker across brownstone streets, jazz spills from smoky clubs, and the hum of life never truly sleeps. Amidst the ordinary rhythm of the city, a quiet force moves unseen. A man who observes, calculates, and controls every hidden current without ever being noticed. His shipments cross oceans, his network threads through alleys, and his influence spreads silently through the city he calls home. This is the story of Frank Lucas, the architect of a silent empire, where power is measured not by guns or noise, but by patience, precision, and invisible mastery. Welcome to a Harlem you think you know, but don't. Close your eyes and picture Harlem in the early 1970s. The streets are alive, buzzing with a rhythm all their own. Neon signs flicker above brownstone facades, casting long, muted glows over stoops where teenagers lean and laugh, cigarette smoke curling into the night. Jazz and soul spill from clubs tucked between corner stores, a soundtrack of the city's heartbeat. Somewhere, the wail of a saxophone cuts through the hum of tires on asphalt, mingling with the chatter of neighbors who have lived here for decades. Amidst all this life, movement, and noise, one man walks quietly, observing it all. Frank Lucas is not a man who demands attention. He doesn't flash gold chains or shout his presence into the night. Yet, the city seems to bend around him in subtle ways. People notice him in whispers. A kid crossing the street pauses mid-step, tilts his head, nods. An older woman watering plants on her stoop offers a brief smile before returning to her world. Frank's power lies not in spectacle, but in observation, calculation, and patience. He remembers the streets he grew up on, corners where deals were made in plain sight, and alleys where shadows carried secrets. But he is not a boy anymore. He is a strategist. And tonight, like so many nights before, he is thinking about the next move. Something bigger, something quieter, something that will change the rules of the game in Harlem. The idea is audacious, even dangerous. A direct pipeline from Saigon bypassing all the middlemen who inflate prices and increase risks. Frank has studied it meticulously, mapping it in his mind like a chessboard. Every port, every shipment, every person along the chain is a potential variable. A single misstep could unravel everything. But Frank thrives on complexity. Where others see chaos, he sees patterns. Where others see danger, he sees opportunity. He walks past a jazz club, the doors wide open, music spilling into the street. Inside, the band swings in perfect rhythm, the trumpet cutting through the smoky haze. Frank pauses for a moment, listening. The melody is familiar, comforting. Harlem is alive, and its pulse reminds him of what's at stake. This is home. And he intends to protect it, shape it, and quietly control the currents that flow beneath its surface. Frank's first steps toward building his empire are not flashy. They are quiet. A meeting in a back room of a brownstone, just a few trusted associates, each one chosen carefully for loyalty, discretion, and skill. A nod, a handshake, and a map spread out across the table. Ports in Saigon. Shipping schedules. Crates that appear ordinary but hold secrets within. Frank explains the plan once, clearly, calmly. Then he listens. Questions are asked and answered. Every doubt accounted for. No room for surprises, at least none he cannot anticipate. The first test is simple yet high stakes. A small shipment, just enough to verify the routes and the chain of trust. If it arrives safely, the path is clear. If not, well, Frank does not dwell on failure. He does not let fear dictate action. He has a rule: control what you can, anticipate what you cannot, and never let emotion cloud judgment. As the night deepens, Frank walks the streets, noting every detail: the flickering streetlights, the patterns of the late-night crowd, the sound of the subway rumbling beneath the city. Each element is a piece of the larger puzzle. A delivery truck pauses at a corner. Frank observes without reaction. A street musician tunes his guitar. Frank notes the rhythm of people passing by. Everything has a place, a pattern, and a purpose. By the time he reaches his modest office, the city is quieter, though never truly silent. He sits at his desk, surrounded by ledgers, maps, and notes. The soft glow of a desk lamp illuminates his face, highlighting the focus in his eyes. Outside, Harlem sleeps lightly, its dreams interwoven with the lives of the people who call it home. Inside, Frank Lucas plants. Always plants. His mind is a machine of precision, turning every piece of information into strategy, every obstacle into opportunity. Tonight, the shipment is en route. Frank does not celebrate, nor does he worry. He simply prepares for the next move. He thinks about Saigon, about the people on the other side who make this possible. He considers the docks, the customs, the potential threats from competitors. Every factor is catalogued, weighed, and stored for action. His empire, though not yet visible to the world, moves silently, like a river beneath the streets. In Harlem, a boy plays stickball on the asphalt, unaware of the currents swirling around him. A woman leans out of a third-floor window, calling to a neighbor. Music pulses softly from the corner club. And somewhere in the shadows, Frank Lucas watches, waits, and calculates. The first moves have been made, and the game has only just begun. It is a quiet empire, an invisible power, but its foundation is stronger than the loudest gunfire or the flashiest car. Precision, patience, discretion. These are the tools Frank wields. The streets of Harlem may never notice the empire growing in their midst, but it will shape their world nonetheless. And as the night stretches on, you can almost hear it. The soft shuffle of crates, the faint whisper of deals made behind closed doors, the quiet footsteps of a man who has learned to bend the city to his will, not with violence but with strategy, observation, and unwavering calm. The first shipment was small, but for Frank it was everything. Every detail mattered. Harlem streets seemed calm as he walked along the familiar sidewalks, the neon glow of corner stores casting warm reflections onto wet asphalt. The hum of distant traffic mixed with the faint strains of a saxophone drifting from a nearby jazz club. Life carried on, unaware that beneath it all, an invisible current was beginning to flow, a current that Frank had meticulously plotted, measured, and calculated. Inside a dim brownstone, Frank's trusted associates gathered around a table cluttered with maps, notebooks, and a single crate, innocuous in appearance. Each man understood the stakes. There would be no mistakes tonight. Frank had chosen them carefully. Loyalty, discretion, and reliability were non-negotiable. A nod from him was all that was needed to begin. "This crate moves tonight," Frank said softly, his voice steady, unwavering. "No attention, no noise. The moment we make a mistake, everything we've planned falls apart." His eyes scanned the room, locking briefly with each associate, a silent reminder of the precision required. The plan was simple in theory. The crate, labeled as ordinary goods, would travel across the city and be handed off discreetly at a predetermined location. From there, it would eventually reach the docks for its journey overseas. In practice, of course, nothing in Harlem was ever truly simple. Variables always existed. Unexpected pedestrians, curious eyes, rival gangs, even the occasional patrol car. Frank accounted for each one. He positioned one of his men near a street corner, pretending to loiter idly, watching. Another stood at a nearby stoop, casually surveying the neighborhood. Frank himself walked slowly behind the crate as it was carried along the back alleys, every step measured. The city felt alive around him. Sounds of footsteps, the distant slam of a car door, the murmur of people in conversation. But to Frank, it was a backdrop, a soundtrack to his silent orchestration. The crate was almost at the handoff point when a shadow moved in an unexpected alleyway. Frank's pulse did not quicken. He had anticipated this. A rival gang had noticed unusual activity and was watching, testing boundaries. Instead of panicking or confronting them, Frank acted with quiet intelligence. He subtly adjusted the path, looping the crate through another alley, unseen. His men followed seamlessly, the operation uninterrupted. By the time the crate reached its final handoff, it was already clear. The first move had succeeded. No alarms sounded, no attention was drawn, yet the ripple of impact had begun. Frank allowed himself a quiet smile. Success was not in celebration, but in knowing that the foundation of something far larger had been laid. As the night deepened, Frank returned to his modest office, the city lights casting long shadows across his desk. He poured himself a glass of water, then leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, replaying every detail of the operation. There had been close calls, minor adjustments, but the result was flawless. In the silent hours of the night, Frank understood the value of patience. Each small victory, unnoticed by the world, was a step toward building an empire. But even as he allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection, Frank was aware of the unseen currents moving around him. Harlem was a city of whispers, and rumors traveled fast. He knew the rival gangs would watch, would probe, would attempt to challenge his growing influence. Every decision, every shipment would be scrutinized. And he welcomed it. Danger sharpened him, honed his strategies, and reminded him why he had chosen this path. In the following days, the ripple of the first shipment reached its intended destination overseas, unharmed and unremarked. Frank's network had proven itself, and yet he knew the real work was only beginning. Expansion would require meticulous planning, trust in his team, and an unshakable calm in the face of adversity. Each new move had to be smarter, quieter, and more precise than the last. The streets of Harlem went on, alive with music, laughter, and life. Yet beneath the neon lights and the bustling sidewalks, a silent empire was forming. And Frank Lucas, moving like a ghost through familiar streets, understood that the true power was in being unseen, in orchestrating chaos into order, and in transforming patience into influence. Tonight, Harlem slept lightly, unaware that the first domino had fallen. Tomorrow the game would grow more complex. And Frank Lucas, calm and calculating, would be ready. The night after the first shipment's quiet success, Frank Lucas sat alone in his office, Harlem streetlights painting muted streaks across the brownstone walls. Outside, the city slept, yet Frank's mind traveled thousands of miles away to Saigon, to the bustling ports and war-torn streets where his future empire was quietly taking root. He visualized the crates moving across oceans, blending into the ordinary shipments that passed unnoticed through customs, warehouses, and docks. Every detail was critical. Every misstep could cost millions and, worse, expose him to forces far beyond Harlem's familiar alleys. Saigon was a world apart from Harlem. The air was thick with humidity, the scent of the river mixing with spices and diesel. War had left its mark, abandoned buildings, guarded checkpoints, and a populace wary of outsiders. Yet in the shadows of chaos, opportunity thrived. Frank had spent months carefully cultivating contacts there, people who understood logistics, commerce, and discretion. Some were remnants of a fractured military network. Others were local merchants who had seen the chaos of occupation and learned to move quietly in its wake. They were cautious, but Frank's reputation for precision preceded him, and trust, once earned, was worth more than gold. The first few conversations had been tense. Frank remembered sitting across a long wooden table, crates stacked around them, as a contact from Saigon scrutinized him, eyes narrowing, fingers drumming a quiet rhythm on the tabletop. "You understand what this takes?" the man asked, voice low. Frank leaned back, calm as ever. "I understand precision, timing, trust, and consequences," he said. That simple statement, delivered with unwavering confidence, had opened the door to a partnership that would become the backbone of his empire. Back in Harlem, Frank visualized the supply chain in meticulous detail. Crates, disguised as everyday goods, textiles, electronics, canned food, would be packed carefully to avoid detection. Each shipment had to move in a precise rhythm. Loaded, shipped, tracked, and received without drawing attention. He imagined the harbor workers, the shipping clerks, the customs inspectors, all part of a moving puzzle. Any disruption could tip the balance, and Frank accounted for every variable. As the first few shipments made their way across the Pacific, Frank kept Harlem's operations humming in parallel. His trusted associates checked and rechecked schedules, routes, and contacts. One small mistake could trigger suspicion, yet none occurred. The empire moved silently, almost invisibly, like a current beneath the city's surface. But Frank knew that as the scale grew, so too would the dangers. Competitors, law enforcement, and even his own team could become vulnerabilities. Every element required vigilance. One evening, a minor complication arose. A shipment was delayed in transit due to unexpected customs scrutiny. The contact in Saigon called Frank directly, voice tight with concern. Most men would have panicked, sent emissaries, or threatened retaliation. Frank, however, remained composed. He analyzed the situation, cross-referenced alternative routes, and devised a plan to reroute the shipment through a different port, one that appeared ordinary and unremarkable. By the next morning, the crate was back on schedule, and Harlem remained unaware of how close the operation had come to exposure. This was the essence of Frank's genius: calm in crisis, calculation in chaos. While others relied on force or intimidation, Frank relied on strategy, foresight, and adaptability. His empire did not need spectacle. It needed quiet efficiency. Every successful shipment reinforced his credibility, not just with his Harlem associates, but with his international partners. Trust, once solidified, became unshakable. Harlem itself remained a living, breathing entity around him. Children played stickball on the asphalt, shopkeepers swept stoops, and music continued to echo from smoky jazz clubs. To the casual observer, nothing had changed. The city was alive, vibrant, unaware of the silent empire threading its way through the streets and across oceans. And yet, Frank saw it all, understood it all, and moved within it like a master conductor orchestrating a symphony that no one else could hear. Tensions began to mount as the shipments increased in frequency. Other Harlem crews began to notice unusual activity. Vans arriving at odd hours, new faces at docks, subtle shifts in street patterns. Frank anticipated curiosity and designed layers of obfuscation. Decoy routes, alternate drop-off points, and trusted lieutenants who acted as buffers between him and the city's watchful eyes. This was a game of shadows, and Frank was unmatched in reading the movements of others without ever being seen himself. Yet even with meticulous planning, the human element remained unpredictable. One of his Harlem associates, a young man named Darnell, grew restless. "Boss," Darnell whispered one night, leaning against the doorframe of Frank's office, "what if someone sees us? What if the cops start asking questions?" Frank looked at him calmly, his expression unreadable. "Then we adapt. Always remember, Darnell, speed is nothing without control. Chaos is nothing without strategy. We move silently, and the world never knows we're here until it's too late." By the third week, the Saigon pipeline had proved itself. Crates arrived on schedule, payments were processed efficiently, and the network of Harlem associates operated like a clockwork machine. Frank allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction, leaning back in his chair, watching the city glow under the night sky. But satisfaction was fleeting. Expansion was inevitable, and with expansion came greater risks. Rival crews would take notice, law enforcement would sniff at the edges, and even allies could become liabilities. Frank's mind never rested. He planned 3 moves ahead, always envisioning contingencies, countermeasures, and potential disruptions. In those quiet, reflective hours, Frank also considered the human cost. He knew the impact of his empire on Harlem, the streets, the families, the lives that intersected with his operations. He rationalized it as part of the system, part of survival, part of building something larger than any one man. And yet, he remained conscious of the thin line he walked, a line between power and exposure, between control and chaos. By the end of the chapter's first month, the empire had proven itself. Harlem continued to hum with its nightly rhythms, oblivious to the undercurrent now flowing beneath its streets. Saigon's port operations ran smoothly, the crates moving with the precision Frank demanded. And Frank Lucas, walking through the streets of Harlem in the quiet hours before dawn, knew one immutable truth: power, when exercised in silence, can be more formidable than any gun, louder than any shout, and enduring beyond the reach of the most vigilant eyes. The city exhaled, the river of lights shimmering along the avenues. Frank allowed himself a moment to simply breathe, to feel the weight of accomplishment tempered by the awareness of what lay ahead. The pipeline was established, but it was only the beginning. Harlem had awakened, and the game had truly begun. And as he vanished into the pre-dawn streets, Frank's mind was already turning to the next move, the next shipment, the next silent triumph. Harlem never truly sleeps. Even when the neon lights dim and the music in the jazz clubs fades to a soft hum, the city's streets pulse with life, carrying whispers, footsteps, and stories. To most, it's a neighborhood like any other, vibrant and chaotic, alive with commerce and community. But to Frank Lucas, every street corner, stoop, and alleyway was a chessboard, every pedestrian a potential variable in a game only he fully understood. After the success of the initial shipments from Saigon, Frank realized that establishing a reliable network in Harlem was just as critical as the transoceanic pipeline itself. The city's pulse could no longer be observed from the outside, it had to be shaped from within. He began identifying locations that could serve as discrete hubs for operations: a back room in a corner bakery, a seldom-used storage space behind a nightclub, a vacant basement under a brownstone. Each location was chosen for accessibility, discretion, and proximity to the streets he knew like the back of his hand. Frank's associates, carefully selected for loyalty and intelligence, became the backbone of this underground network. Each was assigned roles that required absolute precision. Some were couriers, moving shipments across the neighborhood without attracting attention. Others monitored local law enforcement activity, reporting patterns and shifts and patrols. A few were tasked with maintaining the face of the operation: storefronts, casual businesses that would serve as covers for the more delicate work behind the scenes. The real test came with integration. Coordinating multiple points in a living, breathing city meant that even the smallest disruption could cascade into disaster. Frank spent hours mapping routes, timing movements, and anticipating potential leaks. He conducted meetings with the quiet authority of a man who did not need to raise his voice to command attention. Each associate understood that their roles were not just tasks but pieces of a larger, invisible puzzle, and any misstep could have consequences far beyond their comprehension. Even as the network took shape, the first tensions emerged. One young associate, eager to prove himself, began taking liberties, shortcuts, minor deviations from the plan, that drew the scrutiny of others. Frank noticed. He called the man aside in a narrow alley one evening, the orange glow of a street lamp flickering across their faces. "This isn't about speed," Frank said softly, his tone calm but unwavering. "It's about control. The moment you think shortcuts make things easier, you're already behind." The lesson was clear, and the associate nodded, understanding that loyalty and precision mattered more than bravado. Meanwhile, rival crews in Harlem were beginning to sense a shift in the balance of power. Street rumors circulated, crates arriving without commotion, shipments disappearing as if by magic, an unseen hand orchestrating events. Some were intrigued, others were wary. Frank anticipated their curiosity and designed layers of obfuscation, sending decoys along predictable routes, planting misinformation, and ensuring that only his closest, most trusted lieutenants ever saw the full scope of operations. He created a landscape in which opponents could see activity but never grasp its true nature, a veil of shadows and subtlety. High-stakes tension came when one of these rival crews decided to test the network. A seemingly innocuous crate was intercepted, leading to a brief standoff near a quiet corner of 125th Street. Frank, informed immediately, did not confront them head-on. Instead, he leveraged observation and strategy. Using a combination of decoy shipments and carefully timed diversions, he ensured that the intercepted crate could be recovered without direct conflict, preserving both resources and reputation. The incident became a quiet warning. Harlem's new underground was precise, efficient, and invisible, but it was not without oversight. In parallel, Frank expanded the network of safe houses and storage points. Harlem's basements, vacant warehouses, and forgotten rooms beneath brownstones became arteries of movement, each chosen to minimize exposure and maximize flexibility. Couriers moved silently, blending with the rhythms of the city, kids playing stickball, shopkeepers sweeping stoops, musicians setting up instruments for late-night performances. To outsiders, nothing seemed amiss. But beneath the surface, a city-wide operation was humming, orchestrated with meticulous care. Despite the growing complexity, Frank never allowed complacency. He held late-night meetings, reviewing every detail of the operation, noting patterns, anticipating deviations. Maps were spread across tables, pins marking routes, schedules, and contingencies. Every scenario was rehearsed mentally, every variable accounted for. He reminded his team that patience and precision, not aggression, were their greatest weapons. "You don't need to be seen," he would say. "You need to be understood, by yourself first, then by the world." The first few months of Harlem operations solidified Frank's presence without drawing unnecessary attention. The underground network allowed shipments from Saigon to move seamlessly from port to street, from warehouse to handoff point, without detection. The city's natural chaos became a cover, its vibrancy masking the quiet, deliberate rhythm of his empire. Frank understood that power exercised in silence was far more formidable than that flaunted in the streets. And in the shadows of Harlem, he was beginning to command both respect and fear, not through violence, but through calculated, almost invisible mastery. By the end of the chapter, the tension in Harlem had grown palpable, not from visible conflict, but from whispers, speculation, and a sense of unseen control. Rival crews tested boundaries, associates learned the weight of responsibility, and Frank Lucas, calm and unyielding, continued to expand his network with surgical precision. The city moved, alive and unaware, while beneath its surface, an empire of quiet efficiency began to take shape. And Frank, walking through familiar streets under the glow of streetlights, felt the thrill of potential, the knowledge that every step he took was a calculated move in a game that only he truly understood. Harlem's nights carried a rhythm all their own, a syncopation of music, footsteps, and whispered secrets. Even in the quietest hours, the city pulsed with life. Frank Lucas moved through it as he always did, silently, deliberately, observing everything while revealing almost nothing. His empire was no longer just an idea. It was alive, growing, and demanding attention without ever drawing it. This evening, Frank had called a meeting in a small back room of a jazz club, tucked behind the main stage. The musicians were still playing softly, their notes blending with the murmur of patrons in the main hall, unaware of the assembly behind the heavy velvet curtain. A single light bulb hung overhead, casting long, cautious shadows over the faces of those he trusted most. Each associate knew that every word, every gesture mattered. A single misstep could unravel weeks of careful planning. Frank spoke quietly, deliberately. "The network is strong, but it is still fragile. We have rivals watching, testing boundaries. We must anticipate them, and we must control what they can see." His gaze swept the room, steady and calculating. There was no fear in his voice, only precision, the calm authority of a man who had mastered both his environment and himself. The discussion turned to the shipments coming from Saigon. Frank outlined the schedule, emphasizing the importance of timing, discretion, and redundancy. If a crate is delayed, if someone probes too far, we adapt. Always. And never act out of impulse. Each associate took notes, some mentally, some on paper, but all understood that the success of the operation depended on absolute adherence to strategy. But not all threats came from outside. One of the younger associates, eager and ambitious, had begun to question decisions, wondering aloud if shortcuts could accelerate their profits. Frank watched him carefully, recognizing the spark of impatience that could become a liability. Ambition without discipline, Frank said softly, is the fastest route to disaster. You will learn patience or you will step aside. The words hung in the air, a quiet warning that loyalty and precision were worth more than reckless bravado. As the meeting concluded, Frank stepped out into the night, the cool Harlem air wrapping around him. The city felt alive yet secretive, a labyrinth of possibility. He walked past the familiar brownstones, nodding briefly to neighbors, absorbing every detail, the position of trash cans, the rhythm of footsteps on sidewalks, the occasional flicker of a streetlight. To anyone else, these were trivialities. To Frank, they were pieces of an invisible map, a guide to maneuver through both opportunity and danger. In the days that followed, the first signs of rival curiosity emerged. Crates that moved silently through the city were occasionally scrutinized by unknown eyes. Frank anticipated these moments, planting decoy shipments and adjusting routes with subtlety that was almost imperceptible. One night, a rival crew attempted to intercept a delivery, expecting confrontation. Frank had foreseen the possibility. Using a combination of decoys and timing, he ensured the real shipment reached its destination without ever crossing paths with the rival crew. They were left empty-handed, frustrated, and more cautious, a silent acknowledgement of Frank's unseen mastery. Harlem's underground network continued to expand. Safe houses, storage spaces, and hidden routes became arteries in a living system. Couriers moved through the streets, blending seamlessly with ordinary city life. Even the local police, vigilant and alert, never suspected the silent operation threading its way through the neighborhood. Frank's genius lay in exploiting the ordinary, transforming everyday rhythms into shields for his empire. A street musician tuning his trumpet, a vendor closing shop, a late-night taxi, each became part of the camouflage, the theater in which his empire moved unseen. Tension, however, was never absent. One evening, Frank learned that a shipment had drawn attention at a port overseas. Customs agents had inspected a crate, lingering longer than expected. Panic could have spread through his team, but Frank remained composed. He calculated contingencies, rerouted information, and orchestrated a quiet resolution. The shipment was cleared, no alarm raised, and Harlem continued its nightly rhythm, unaware of the brush with potential disaster. Even as his empire grew in complexity and reach, Frank never lost touch with the human element. He watched the streets, noting the children playing stickball, the shopkeepers chatting on stoops, the musicians practicing late-night sets. This city, vibrant and unpredictable, was both a stage and a shield. His power depended not only on logistics and strategy but on understanding the subtle interplay between people, place, and timing. By the end of the chapter, Harlem had become a silent partner in Frank's empire. Rival crews were aware of a presence, a force operating with uncanny precision, yet they could not locate it. Associates moved with confidence, tempered by the lessons of patience and discipline. And Frank Lucas, walking through the streets under the glow of streetlights and neon signs, felt the quiet thrill of unseen power, an empire of whispers and shadows, growing stronger with every calculated step. The city slept lightly that night, oblivious to the currents moving beneath its surface. And Frank, calm and unyielding, knew that each silent success laid the foundation for something far greater. His empire was not just a network of shipments and safe houses, it was a testament to discipline, foresight, and the quiet, relentless art of control. The streets of Harlem seemed smaller at night, narrower somehow, as Frank Lucas walked them with deliberate steps. The city had grown familiar under his watchful eyes, each alley, corner, and brownstone etched into his mind like a map. Yet now, the scale of his operations demanded more than familiarity. The pipeline from Saigon was expanding. More shipments, more routes, more hands involved. Every new connection added opportunity, but it also multiplied the risks. Frank understood the stakes. One delay, one oversight, could unravel months of careful planning. The stakes were no longer abstract, they were immediate and tangible. He had begun to coordinate multiple shipments simultaneously, sending crates from different ports, each on its own path, each under the watchful eye of a trusted lieutenant. Precision was paramount. Every team member had to act as part of a larger organism, aware of their role but blind to unnecessary details. In Saigon, the situation was complex. The city, still recovering from the chaos of war, presented logistical and political challenges. Ports were heavily monitored, labor forces unpredictable, and local authorities suspicious of any irregular activity. Frank had developed relationships with individuals who could move shipments without attracting attention, but he knew that complacency was dangerous. Every container, every clerk, every dock worker was a potential variable. One shipment nearly turned disastrous. A container was held up unexpectedly at the port due to new inspections. Panic could have rippled through his network, but Frank remained calm. He coordinated a rapid response, rerouting the shipment through a secondary port he had prepared months earlier as a contingency. Couriers in Harlem adjusted their schedules, alternate storage locations were activated, and by dawn, the shipment was safely en route to its final destination. It was a minor victory in the grand scheme, but each success reinforced the integrity of his growing empire. Meanwhile, in Harlem, the challenges of expansion became visible in subtle ways. Rival crews were watching more closely, curious about the increased activity, noting the comings and goings of vehicles and people. One evening, a group of local gang members tested the boundaries of Frank's network, attempting to intercept a crate on its way to a hidden warehouse. Frank had anticipated this. Using a combination of decoys, rerouted shipments, and timing precision, he ensured that the real crate reached its destination without confrontation. The rival crew was left empty-handed, frustrated, and more cautious, a silent acknowledgement of Frank's strategic superiority. The expansion also brought internal pressures. Associates had to manage larger responsibilities, coordinate multiple routes, and maintain absolute discretion. Frank held nightly briefings, emphasizing the importance of vigilance and adaptation. He reminded his team that mistakes, even small ones, could cascade into consequences far greater than expected. Each briefing was a study in patience and discipline, reinforcing the principle that control was the ultimate form of power. Despite the growing complexity, Frank never lost sight of the human dimension. He observed Harlem streets as a living organism, noting patterns of behavior, the rhythms of daily life, and the interplay of people and place. Children played stickball on empty streets, musicians practiced late-night sets, shopkeepers swept their stoops. Each detail provided context, allowing him to weave his operations seamlessly into the fabric of the city. The ordinary, in Frank's view, was the perfect camouflage. One particularly tense evening, Frank encountered a logistical bottleneck, 2 shipments converging at a single warehouse simultaneously with rival crews in proximity. A simple misstep could have led to discovery or confrontation. Frank analyzed the situation, assigning alternate routes, staggering arrival times, and positioning trusted lieutenants to oversee each handoff. The operation proceeded flawlessly, the shipments moving silently to their intended locations, unseen and uninterrupted. Success, once again, lay not in force or visibility, but in careful calculation and control. By mid-month, the expanded pipeline had proven its resilience. Crates moved from Saigon to Harlem with remarkable efficiency, rival crews were cautious, and internal operations ran like a well-oiled machine. Frank allowed himself a brief moment of reflection, standing atop a familiar stoop, watching the neon glow of the streets and the slow rhythm of passing cars. Harlem remained alive, vibrant, unaware of the silent empire threading through its alleys and brownstones. Yet Frank knew that expansion brought inevitable challenges. More shipments meant more exposure, more people meant more variables, and more rivals meant increased scrutiny. Every move required anticipation, adaptation, and unwavering composure. As he walked the streets under the soft glow of streetlights, he felt the quiet thrill of control, the understanding that power exercised invisibly could surpass the loudest display of force. The night stretched on, filled with the hum of distant traffic, faint music from jazz clubs, and the soft shuffle of shoes on wet asphalt. Frank moved like a shadow among these rhythms, aware of every detail, every possibility. Harlem slept lightly, its dreams interwoven with the unseen currents moving beneath its surface. And Frank Lucas, calm, calculating, and unyielding, continued to orchestrate his empire, an empire defined not by spectacle, but by quiet precision, patience, and relentless intelligence. Harlem had grown quieter in ways that the casual observer could not notice. The streets still thrummed with music, chatter, and the rhythmic shuffle of daily life, but beneath it all, a current of tension flowed. Rival crews, aware that someone was orchestrating events with uncanny precision, began to test the limits. Whispers of unseen power traveled quickly, carried in sidelong glances, hushed conversations on stoops, and casual mentions in local clubs. Frank Lucas had become an invisible force, and curiosity was turning into scrutiny. One late afternoon, Frank walked past a familiar jazz club, the soft strains of a trumpet spilling into the street. He noticed subtle signs: a group of men lingering longer than necessary near an alleyway, vehicles parked slightly out of place, the flicker of unfamiliar faces among familiar storefronts. These were small observations, almost imperceptible, yet in Frank's eyes they were warnings. His mind catalogued each detail, connecting dots invisible to anyone else. Rival crews were testing the network, probing its strength, and he intended to respond, not with aggression but with precision. Inside a dimly lit room above the club, Frank gathered his closest lieutenants. Maps were spread across a worn wooden table, pins marking key points along the Saigon-Harlem pipeline and local drop-off sites. He spoke softly, each word deliberate. "They are testing us. Not with guns, not with threats, but with observation. They want to see how far they can push. We will let them see what we want, and they will learn nothing else." His calm authority permeated the room. Associates listened intently, understanding that every move was part of a larger strategy. The first challenge came sooner than expected. A rival crew intercepted a minor shipment, hoping to intimidate Frank's associates and uncover the network. It was a calculated risk on their part, one they believed would yield information. But Frank had anticipated such a maneuver. Using prepositioned decoy crates and rerouted shipments, the Real cargo moved silently through alternate routes, untouched and unseen. The rivals, confronted only with empty crates and shadows, left the scene with frustration and awe, a quiet acknowledgement of Frank's invisible control. Internal dynamics added complexity. One young associate, emboldened by previous successes, questioned Frank's methods. "Why not move faster, make more money?" he asked, his tone curious but edged with impatience. Frank regarded him steadily. "Speed without control is chaos. Discipline is what keeps us alive, what keeps Harlem ours. Learn patience or you'll be left behind." The lesson was sharp but necessary, reinforcing the principles upon which the empire was built. Frank also recognized that public perception mattered, even if indirectly. Harlem's residents had begun to whisper about his presence, though few understood its extent. Observers noted the efficiency of deliveries, the uncanny precision of movements, and the quiet coordination that seemed almost supernatural. Frank allowed these perceptions to exist. Misinformation, carefully cultivated, became an additional layer of protection. Rival crews were encouraged to see activity without understanding its source, creating confusion and hesitation. Tensions escalated when Frank received intelligence that another crew planned to observe one of his primary safe houses. He acted swiftly, deploying a combination of decoy activity, alternate storage sites, and subtle surveillance to ensure the real operations remained untouched. The rivals arrived to find what appeared to be ordinary business: a closed storefront, a vacant alley, nothing to provoke suspicion. Their failure was silent but decisive. Frank's network remained invisible, yet his influence grew stronger with every carefully executed move. As the week progressed, Frank's strategic thinking extended beyond immediate threats. He began to anticipate patterns of rival behavior, predicting moves before they occurred. Harlem's streets, its alleys, its brownstones, and its clubs were all part of a living map, a landscape he read with precision. Couriers moved with discretion, associates executed instructions without hesitation, and shipments continued from Saigon to Harlem with flawless timing. The city itself, unknowingly, was a partner in his empire, its ordinary rhythms masking the extraordinary complexity beneath. One night, as he walked through the dimly lit streets, Frank reflected on the nature of power. Rival crews sought confrontation, visibility, and noise, but he had learned that the most formidable influence was silent, strategic, and invisible. Control, patience, and foresight were far more potent than violence or spectacle. And as he passed a corner where children played stickball under the flickering glow of a streetlight, he felt the weight and the thrill of the empire he was building, unseen yet undeniable. The chapter concluded with a delicate balance of tension and accomplishment. Rival crews had been tested, internal discipline reinforced, and the network solidified. Frank's empire moved like a shadow beneath Harlem, its presence felt but never fully revealed. And as he disappeared into the quiet streets, the city's heartbeat continued, oblivious to the currents flowing beneath, a testament to the precision, patience and intelligence of the man who had learned to wield power without spectacle. Harlem was changing, though few noticed it. From the stoops of brownstones to the dimly lit alleys, whispers of an unseen force traveled quietly, carried by observation and rumor rather than noise or violence. Frank Lucas understood that power in Harlem, and in any city, was not measured solely by control over streets or shipments. It was measured by influence, by the flow of money, and by the ability to navigate forces that no one else could see. With the pipeline from Saigon running smoothly and the underground network in Harlem operating with precision, Frank began to consider expansion beyond logistics. Money had to move efficiently, and influence had to extend silently into corners of the city that he had not yet touched. Cash flow, investment in legitimate enterprises, and the strategic placement of resources became critical. He had learned that visibility was dangerous, subtlety was strength. Frank spent late nights reviewing ledgers and maps. Numbers flowed across pages, representing more than profit. They were indicators of stability, trust, and potential vulnerability. He met with his closest associates to discuss investments in local businesses, small ventures that could serve both as revenue streams and cover for operations. A neighborhood cafe, a clothing boutique, and even a small import shop became nodes in the sprawling web he was building. Each move had to be deliberate. Each investment had to serve multiple purposes without drawing attention. But as influence grew, so did scrutiny. Local law enforcement had begun to take note of unusual activity. Patrols were more frequent near certain corners. Vans were occasionally checked. Questions were asked that had no immediate answers. Frank anticipated this. He instructed his lieutenants on how to conduct operations under observation, emphasizing discretion and patience. He knew that rushing or reacting emotionally would be catastrophic. Each encounter with law enforcement became a study in subtlety, ensuring that the network continued to operate while leaving no trace of its existence. One afternoon, a minor shipment was delayed due to an unexpected inspection. Frank's contact in Saigon called, tension in his voice, but Frank remained calm. He devised an immediate solution: reroute the shipment, adjust local schedules, and use decoy deliveries to maintain the appearance of normalcy. Within hours, the shipment arrived safely, its journey unnoticed by any observer. The network had proven resilient, but the incident reinforced the necessity of foresight and control. Meanwhile, rival crews in Harlem were growing more daring. One group attempted to encroach on Frank's territory, testing the limits of his influence. Frank responded not with confrontation but with strategy. Using a combination of information, subtle intimidation, and calculated risk, he ensured that the rivals understood the boundaries without a single act of violence. The lesson was clear. Power exercised silently, intelligently, and invisibly was more formidable than any public display. Financial operations became increasingly sophisticated. Frank established multiple channels for moving money, blending legitimate investments with his underground revenue streams. Trusted associates handled discrete transactions, ensuring that the flow of cash supported both the network and his personal expansion plans. Every dollar, every movement of funds, was calculated to strengthen control and minimize exposure. The sophistication of the operation made it almost untouchable, yet Frank knew that vigilance was paramount. As the days passed, Frank's influence extended beyond street corners and warehouses. Neighborhood businesses subtly aligned with him, employees and owners became discreet allies, and even casual observers began to recognize patterns they could not fully explain. Harlem was becoming a city shaped in quiet, deliberate ways. Frank understood that influence was more sustainable than fear, and that trust, once earned, could be a more powerful tool than intimidation. The tension mounted one evening when an unexpected visit from local authorities coincided with a high-value shipment. Officers arrived, asking routine questions, while Frank calmly hosted them in his office, presenting himself as a concerned community member. Every word, every gesture was measured. By the time they left, the shipment had already been rerouted, unseen and unaffected. Frank's composure under pressure reinforced his reputation as both clever and untouchable. A man who understood the balance of visibility and secrecy better than anyone else in Harlem. Despite the growing complexity, Frank never allowed detachment from Harlem's pulse. He observed the streets, noting rhythms, human behaviors, and interactions that could impact operations. Children played stickball under the glow of streetlights, musicians rehearsed in late-night clubs, and shopkeepers prepared for the next day. Each ordinary moment provided cover for extraordinary operations. It was in the interplay of ordinary life and strategic planning that Frank's genius revealed itself. By the end of the chapter, Frank's empire had not only survived but thrived amid increasing scrutiny. His financial maneuvers extended influence quietly, his operations continued unimpeded, and rival crews hesitated before testing boundaries. Harlem had become both shield and stage, its streets hiding the intricate web of control he had created. Frank Lucas understood that money, influence, and strategy combined could achieve what force alone never could. The night fell softly over the city. Jazz notes floated from open windows, footsteps echoed in alleys, and the glow of neon signs reflected on rain-slicked streets. Harlem moved, breathing, unaware of the quiet empire that threaded through its veins. And Frank, walking through familiar streets under the soft light of lampposts, felt the steady, exhilarating pulse of power, silent, precise, and utterly his. Even in Harlem's busiest streets, Frank Lucas had learned to see what others could not. The city was alive, pulsing with music, chatter, and the rhythm of ordinary life, yet beneath it all, hidden currents moved quietly, shaping the fate of the neighborhood. For months, Frank had orchestrated shipments, established his network, and expanded influence. But now, an unseen challenge had emerged. Someone inside his operation was watching, learning, and potentially plotting. It started subtly. Notes misplaced. Schedules reviewed more than necessary. A courier asking questions outside the scope of their role. Frank noticed these anomalies not by luck but by training himself to see patterns in chaos. Every deviation, no matter how small, was a clue. And in this game, even a small clue could mean the difference between continued control and devastating exposure. Frank called a quiet meeting in a private back room above a Harlem bookstore. Only his closest lieutenants were present. The room was dim, lit by a single overhead bulb that cast elongated shadows across the walls. Frank spoke softly, each word measured. "We have someone who thinks they can operate in the shadows. Someone testing boundaries, observing, taking liberties. They will be exposed, but carefully. We do not act out of anger. We act out of precision." The team listened intently. Frank outlined a subtle strategy to flush out the internal threat without alarming the rest of the network. Decoy shipments were planned, alternate routes mapped, and false information disseminated to observe reactions. The goal was simple: identify the source, neutralize the risk, and maintain absolute secrecy. No one outside this room could know the game being played. Meanwhile, Harlem continued its nightly rhythm. Children played stickball in quiet streets, neon signs reflected off puddles from an afternoon drizzle, and the distant strains of a trumpet floated from a late-night jazz club. To the casual observer, nothing was amiss. But Frank's eyes missed nothing. Every ordinary movement could reveal extraordinary secrets if one knew how to watch. The first clue came when a shipment that had been carefully rerouted was unexpectedly moved along a secondary path. Frank recognized the signature immediately. Someone had accessed information they shouldn't have. His pulse did not quicken. He had anticipated this possibility. A subtle adjustment in the network, a time diversion, and he had not only protected the shipment but observed the reactions of his associates to identify the culprit. It was Darnell, a promising but impulsive young lieutenant. He had been curious, ambitious, and occasionally reckless. Frank confronted him quietly, outside the prying eyes of others, under the dim glow of a Harlem streetlight. "You were curious," Frank said softly, "and that curiosity could have destroyed everything we've built." Darnell's head hung low. "I didn't mean," he began. Frank interrupted gently but firmly. "Intentions don't matter. Actions do. You must learn discipline. You must learn patience. Or you leave." With the internal threat addressed, Frank turned attention back to external risks. Rival crews, sensing change, began to probe once more. They tested minor shipments, observed street corners, and watched patterns of movement. Frank, anticipating these maneuvers, executed a series of subtle countermeasures. Decoy routes, false schedules, and controlled leaks of information created an illusion of vulnerability. The rivals were left guessing, unable to decipher the true structure of the network. Throughout these maneuvers, Frank remained in constant observation, blending seamlessly into Harlem's life. He walked past familiar brownstones, nodded briefly to residents, and absorbed details. A trash can moved slightly out of place, a streetlight flickering in a rhythm that could indicate patrols, the faint chatter of a group of teenagers testing boundaries. Every observation informed his next move, every detail a potential advantage. The most tense moment came one night when Darnell, eager to prove his loyalty after the earlier confrontation, attempted to move a shipment ahead of schedule without informing Frank. The move could have exposed the operation. Frank acted swiftly, intercepting the shipment quietly, redirecting it through a pre-planned alternate route, and ensuring that no one, rivals, associates, or authorities, noticed any irregularity. Darnell learned a critical lesson. Power in Harlem and in Frank's empire required absolute precision, discretion, and unwavering patience. By the end of the chapter, Frank's empire had survived both internal and external challenges. Rival crews remained cautious, internal discipline was reinforced, and the network continued to operate with near-perfect efficiency. Harlem remained vibrant, alive, and unaware of the silent control threading through its streets. And Frank Lucas, walking through rain-slicked alleys and under flickering streetlights, understood the profound truth that had guided his rise. True power was invisible, strategic, and exercised with patience. The city's heartbeat continued, music and footsteps blending into a rhythm that masked extraordinary operations. And Frank, calm and calculating, continued to orchestrate his empire, ready for the next challenge, knowing that every shadow, every whisper, and every move in Harlem was now part of a game only he could truly see and control. The Atlantic was vast, endless, and unforgiving. Containers bobbed silently atop dark waters, their contents a secret known only to a handful of trusted individuals. For Frank Lucas, each crate that left Saigon represented not just profit, but reputation, control, and the continuation of an empire built on precision and patience. Yet even the ocean could not guarantee safety. Weather, human error, and the ever-present curiosity of authorities posed threats that required constant vigilance. Frank's eyes traced the shipping schedule once more, noting the precise timing of arrivals, departures, and inspections. Every shipment was carefully orchestrated. Crates disguised as ordinary goods, documentation meticulously prepared, and local contacts briefed on contingency plans. A single misstep could alert rivals or authorities, compromising months of careful work. He did not underestimate the stakes. He had learned through experience that attention to detail was as critical as courage and intelligence. The challenge arrived sooner than expected. A shipment nearing the port of New York faced unexpected scrutiny. Customs officers had paused the container, inspecting paperwork and examining seals more carefully than usual. Panic could have rippled through the operation, yet Frank remained calm, assessing the situation with a strategist's eye. He contacted his local associate, a seasoned logistician named Harris, instructing him to prepare an alternate warehouse, delay secondary deliveries, and subtly reroute communications. Timing was everything. Hesitation could be disastrous. Meanwhile, in Harlem, couriers waited in dimly lit alleys, unaware of the near crisis at the port. Frank orchestrated subtle diversions. Decoy shipments moved along parallel routes, fake delivery schedules were communicated to rival observers, and trusted associates acted as buffers, ensuring the real shipment's movement remained unseen. By midnight, the container had been discreetly redirected to the alternate warehouse, arriving safely without raising suspicion. The city remained oblivious, its streets alive with music, laughter, and ordinary life. Even as he handled logistics, Frank never lost sight of the human element. He understood that his associates, while skilled, were vulnerable to fear and distraction. He coached them patiently, emphasizing discipline, observation, and calm under pressure. "Chaos is everywhere," he said quietly one night in a meeting above a Harlem bookstore. "But control is ours if we do not let it slip. Never panic. Adjust. Move silently. And always anticipate the next move." The lessons extended to rivals as well. Word of the near disruption reached local crews in Harlem, though details were scarce. Frank's reputation for calm control over chaotic situations grew, creating an invisible barrier of deterrence. Rival crews learned quickly. Testing him overtly invited nothing but failure, while observing quietly yielded no insight. It was a chess game played with human pawns, logistics, and the city itself as the board. Tension reached a peak one evening when a secondary shipment, scheduled to coincide with the rerouted container, nearly collided with an unexpected inspection at a small warehouse on 125th Street. Frank had anticipated the possibility, prepositioning an alternate storage site and briefing couriers on rapid rerouting. The operation unfolded seamlessly, invisible to all but those directly involved. No alarms, no confrontation, only the quiet satisfaction of flawless execution under pressure. Frank's mind, always active, turned toward future contingencies. Expansion was inevitable, and each new shipment added complexity, risk, and opportunity. He planned 3 moves ahead, imagining rival responses, law enforcement scrutiny, and potential human error. Every decision, every adjustment strengthened the network, reinforcing both operational security and the psychological dominance he wielded without ever raising his voice or brandishing a weapon. By the end of the chapter, the Atlantic had carried another shipment safely into Harlem, the network had operated flawlessly under unexpected scrutiny, and Frank's empire continued to expand with silent efficiency. The city around him remained vibrant, alive, and unaware of the intricate machinery moving beneath its streets and along its ports. And as Frank walked alone along a rain-slicked street under the glow of lampposts, he understood the truth that had guided him since the first shipment. Power exercised invisibly with patience, foresight, and intelligence, could endure far longer than the loudest display of force. The city's heartbeat persisted, the hum of traffic blending with jazz drifting from clubs, while Frank Lucas moved among it like a shadow, calm, calculating, and prepared for whatever threat or opportunity might emerge next. Harlem slept lightly, but beneath its streets, under the neon glow and in the shadow of docks, an empire thrived, silent, precise, and unstoppable. Harlem had always been alive, vibrant, and unpredictable. But under Frank Lucas's watchful eye, the rhythm of the city had begun to shift in ways few noticed but everyone felt. The streets remained bustling with music, laughter, and life, yet beneath that familiar pulse, a new order was quietly taking shape. Frank's empire, invisible to most, was beginning to assert influence in subtle, undeniable ways. The neighborhood's businesses, once independent and scattered, now functioned as nodes in a network. Cafes, corner stores, clothing shops, and even local bars had become discreet partners, serving as observation points, temporary storage, or cover for operations. Owners and employees understood that compliance ensured protection. Defiance would be met with consequences neither immediate nor public, but effective nonetheless. The city's natural rhythm masked these movements, allowing Frank to orchestrate events without disruption. Rival crews, however, were becoming increasingly aware of a presence in Harlem they could not confront directly. Observers noted the precision of deliveries, the absence of mistakes, and the quiet efficiency of Frank's associates. Whispers circulated, "Have you seen how smooth this runs? Nobody seems to know, yet it just works." Others speculated, unsure whether they were witnessing luck or mastery. In truth, it was neither. It was strategy, patience, and disciplined execution at a level unmatched in the city. Frank remained calm, aware that visibility could be dangerous. He instructed his team on subtle dominance, maintaining presence without confrontation, projecting control through efficiency rather than force. Couriers followed precise schedules, shipments moved silently, and associates reinforced security while remaining invisible. Each successful movement further solidified Frank's reputation, creating a psychological advantage over rivals who could observe but not intervene effectively. One evening, a minor miscommunication threatened to disrupt operations. A courier misread a schedule, nearly arriving at a drop-off point during an unscheduled police inspection. Frank, foreseeing potential disruption, had already established alternate routes. He calmly redirected the courier, adjusted downstream schedules, and ensured the shipment reached its destination without incident. To the public, it appeared as a routine delivery. To Frank, it was a reinforcement of control, a reminder that the empire depended on anticipation and adaptability, not luck. In the aftermath, rival crews attempted subtle incursions, probing street corners, testing reactions, and observing movements. Frank responded with strategic adjustments, decoy shipments, false timings, and controlled visibility. By allowing rivals to see activity without understanding its purpose, he created an aura of omnipresence, instilling caution and hesitation. The lesson was clear: challenge the empire at your peril, for its true power lay not in violence but in foresight and precision. Meanwhile, the people of Harlem continued their daily lives, unaware that the streets, alleys, and brownstones were now part of a silent, intricate web of control. Children played stickball under flickering streetlights, shopkeepers closed their shops at dusk, and jazz musicians rehearsed for late-night performances. Every ordinary action provided cover for extraordinary operations. Frank's genius was in embedding the empire within the life of the city, making it nearly impossible for outsiders to discern its presence. By the middle of the month, the influence of Frank's empire extended beyond mere logistics. Financial channels strengthened, partnerships solidified, and even law enforcement became inadvertently complicit in the seamless flow of operations. Observations suggested efficiency, yet no evidence pointed to the mastermind behind it. The network had matured, balancing visibility and secrecy, influence and discretion. Harlem itself had become a partner, unaware but essential. Tension, however, was never absent. Rival crews, though cautious, continued to test boundaries. One group attempted a bold move, intercepting a shipment thought to be less secure. Frank, anticipating such attempts, had prepared contingency measures. Alternate routes, prepositioned safe houses, and timed decoys ensured that the shipment remained untouched, while the rivals were left empty-handed and unsettled. The operation reinforced the unassailable nature of Frank's control and the invisible reach of his influence. By the end of the chapter, Harlem had been subtly transformed. The city's pulse remained familiar, vibrant, and alive, yet beneath its surface an intricate network thrived. Frank Lucas had established a quiet empire, powerful, strategic, and almost entirely unseen. Rival crews acknowledged his dominance even if silently, associates understood the stakes and the discipline required, and the city itself continued its rhythm, unaware that its ordinary life masked an extraordinary operation. As Frank walked through rain-slicked streets under the neon glow of storefronts and the soft hum of distant jazz, he felt the quiet thrill of control. The empire had grown, influence was solidified, and the balance of power had shifted without a single shot fired. Harlem had risen, not in chaos, but in subtle, deliberate harmony with the will of a man who understood that true power was exercised invisibly, with patience, strategy, and unwavering precision. Harlem slept, but the city never truly rested. The streets, bathed in neon light, echoed with distant music, muffled conversations, and the subtle rhythm of life. To most it was an ordinary night, one indistinguishable from countless others. But beneath the surface, the invisible currents orchestrated by Frank Lucas moved steadily, silently, and with absolute precision. The empire he had built was no longer just a network, it had become part of the city itself. Frank stood on the rooftop of a familiar brownstone, overlooking the neighborhood he had grown to know as intimately as the lines on his own hands. The city stretched below him, the hum of traffic, the flicker of streetlights reflecting on wet asphalt, and the faint strains of jazz drifting from an open club. Each sound, each movement, each shadow was part of a complex mosaic that Frank had learned to read with uncanny clarity. The streets were alive, yet his presence remained invisible, undetected by anyone who did not know exactly where to look. Over the months, the network had grown into a seamless system. Shipments from Saigon moved with unparalleled efficiency, supported by a series of warehouses, safe houses, and trusted associates scattered throughout Harlem. Every route had been tested, every contingency anticipated. Rival crews, once brazen, had learned caution, observing without action, their attempts to test boundaries met with subtle deflection or invisible decoy operations. Even law enforcement, vigilant and persistent, remained unaware of the true scale of the empire quietly controlling the flow beneath the city's streets. Frank's attention, however, was never solely on operations. He understood that power extended beyond logistics. It resided in influence, perception, and the loyalty of those who served within the network. Associates had been trained, mentored, and, when necessary, corrected, always with a focus on discipline and patience. Each person understood that their actions affected not only immediate shipments but the integrity of the entire enterprise. Trust, once earned, was invaluable. Mistakes were lessons carefully administered. On this particular night, Frank reflected on the empire he had quietly shaped. The first shipments from Saigon, the meticulous expansion of the Harlem network, and the silent enforcement of boundaries had all led to a singular point of control. The city's ordinary rhythms, the children playing stickball, the shopkeepers closing their doors, the late-night musicians practicing in hidden corners, now masked a system of extraordinary efficiency and power. The ordinary had become camouflage, and through it Frank's influence had spread imperceptibly, yet undeniably. Challenges had come from all directions. Rival crews had attempted subtle incursions, internal associates had tested limits, and even the unpredictable forces of nature and law had threatened disruption. Yet each challenge had been met with calm precision. The empire was resilient not because it was fortified with violence, but because it was structured, disciplined, and adaptable. Every setback, minor as it might have been, had been anticipated and neutralized without fanfare. The quiet mastery of operations became the true measure of power. As Frank observed Harlem from the rooftop, he allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. The city was unchanged in appearance, yet it had transformed under his influence. Where chaos might have reigned, order now prevailed, silent, invisible, and strategic. Power, he understood, was not measured by confrontation or spectacle. It was measured by the ability to control outcomes, anticipate moves, and maintain dominance without drawing attention. In the shadows, beneath the city streets and within hidden warehouses, his network hummed like a perfectly tuned engine. Couriers moved silently, shipments arrived and departed with flawless timing, and associates executed orders with unwavering discipline. Rival crews hesitated to test boundaries, understanding that the unseen hand guiding Harlem was not to be underestimated. Even the casual observer walking the streets at night remained unaware of the meticulous orchestration shaping the neighborhood's unseen currents. The final lesson of Frank's empire was one of subtlety. True power did not demand recognition. Influence exercised in silence, strategy executed with patience, and control maintained with precision were more formidable than any loud, visible display. Harlem had become a city shaped not by force but by foresight, a living testament to the quiet mastery of one man who had learned to bend circumstance to his will without ever raising his voice. By dawn, Harlem streets continued their familiar rhythm. Children heading to early morning games, shopkeepers unlocking doors, and musicians preparing for evening performances. And through it all, the invisible current of Frank Lucas's empire flowed smoothly, a silent testament to strategy, discipline, and vision. The city's heartbeat remained vibrant, alive, and undisturbed, even as its undercurrents had been forever transformed. Frank stood on the rooftop until the first light of morning touched the rooftops and streets below. He watched the city awaken, each movement a reminder that power exercised in silence was enduring. The empire had grown from careful observation, disciplined execution, and unyielding patience. Harlem had risen not with noise, but with invisible authority. And Frank Lucas, calm and calculating, understood that his legacy was not in the stories told aloud, but in the quiet, unchallenged mastery he had established. A silent empire, enduring and unstoppable.